My name is Alexander Bryant, and I've never been the kind of man who loses sleep over much. I've got a good house in Orlando, Florida, a wife named Teresa who still laughs at my terrible jokes after 32 years, 3 daughters I'd walk through fire for, and a recliner that has shaped itself to my exact body over the course of a decade. I sleep like a rock most nights. Always have. Heavy sleeper. Ask Teresa. She'll tell you I could snooze through a Category 4 hurricane if I had the right pillow and somebody turned off the weather alerts on my phone. Knox knew that about me. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was underestimating what a man who loves his daughter is capable of when he finds out she's been betrayed inside his own house by someone who sat at his table and drank his beer and called him sir with that polished smile. His third, and most spectacular, mistake was not noticing the cameras. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this whole thing actually started, because a story like this one doesn't begin with a villain creeping through a dark hallway. It begins the way most disasters do. Quietly, over a home-cooked meal, with someone you thought you could trust sitting right across from you, cutting their chicken with a knife that doesn't belong to them. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Teresa and I had been married 32 years when our youngest daughter, Autumn, brought Knox Mercer home for the first time. She was 26. He was 30. He drove a car that cost more than my first house, wore cologne you could smell before he made it through the door, and shook my hand with the kind of grip that's been practiced, designed to impress rather than connect. I smiled. I shook back. I said all the right things because I know how to be a gracious host even when something is sitting sideways in my gut. But I noticed, men like me, men who've spent decades working alongside people, reading them, figuring out who's going to pull their weight and who's going to cost you time and money. We notice things that other people are too polite or too optimistic to acknowledge. Knox Mercer had eyes that were always moving. Not curious eyes. Not the eyes of a man who's genuinely interested in the world around him. Calculating eyes. The kind that are always measuring distances and exits and angles. Always doing quiet arithmetic on everything in a room. He's polished, I told Teresa that night, after Autumn had left and we were washing dishes together in the kitchen. He seems sweet, she said. Sweet, I repeated, like I was tasting the word and finding it unsatisfying. She gave me the look. 32 years of marriage, and that look hadn't changed one bit. The one that says, Alexander Bryant, I know exactly what you're doing, and you will not ruin this for her. So I rinsed the last glass, dried my hands, and kept my mouth shut. I kept it shut for 2 years. Autumn married Knox on a warm evening. The kind of warm evening Orlando does better than almost anywhere else. A beautiful outdoor ceremony with white lanterns strung through the old oak trees in the venue's garden. She wore her grandmother's earrings. She cried happy tears walking down the aisle, the kind that catch you off guard even when you've been looking forward to the moment. Knox cried too, or something that resembled it closely enough, that I might have been persuaded if I hadn't already spent 2 years cataloging the small, precise ways he performed sincerity on demand. I walked her down that aisle. I put her hand in his. I smiled at my daughter and told her she was beautiful, because she was, and I told myself, firmly, deliberately, that I was wrong about this man, that sometimes a gut feeling is just the indigestion of a stubborn father who doesn't want to share his youngest girl with anyone, that the world was full of polished men who turned out to be decent husbands, and who was I to say Knox wasn't one of them? I told myself that for another full year after the wedding. Then my oldest daughter Molly called me. Molly was 34 years old, ran her own real estate business, and had the kind of sharp, unsentimental mind that had made her good at it. She was married to a solid, quiet man named Dalton, who worked in logistics and had the useful quality of never overreacting to anything. Molly didn't call me unless something was genuinely serious. She wasn't a worrier. She wasn't a dramatist. She dealt with problems by naming them plainly and moving to solutions, which was something she'd gotten from me and which I've always considered a compliment to both of us. When her name lit up my phone at 10:30 on a still weeknight, I answered on the first ring. Dad. Just that one word, and I already felt the back of my neck go tight. What is it? A pause. I could hear her breathing. Slow, deliberate, the way you breathe when you're managing yourself. I need to tell you something about Knox, and I need you to promise me you won't do anything rash before you hear the whole thing. Tell me. Promise first. Molly. Dad, I mean it. Promise me. I leaned back in my recliner and looked at the ceiling. Fine, I promise. Now talk. What she told me over the next 40 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about the previous 3 years. She'd been sitting on this information for 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks of going back and forth, second-guessing herself, desperately hoping she was wrong, before she finally accepted that she wasn't, and that keeping it from me any longer wasn't protecting anyone. Knox had a second phone, a separate line, slim and dark, tucked inside the breast pocket of his suit jacket. Autumn had never mentioned it, because Autumn didn't know about it. Molly had been at a restaurant, one of those intimate, low-lit places near the downtown arts district, the kind where booths have high backs and conversations stay contained. With a colleague, when she spotted Knox at a corner table, he was not alone. He was with a woman, young, well-dressed, leaning toward him across the table in the way that people lean toward each other when they've forgotten there's a room around them. Not a colleague, not a friend. The body language was unmistakable to anyone paying attention, and Molly always paid attention. She'd watched for a full 10 minutes, she said, silently hoping with every passing second that some innocent explanation would materialize. None did. She watched Knox reach across the table and cover the woman's hand with his. She watched him tuck a strand of the woman's hair behind her ear, a gesture so deliberate and familiar that it turned Molly's stomach. I didn't say anything for a long moment after she finished. "Dad, you still there?" "I'm here," I said. My voice came out clean and flat. Teresa has always said that's the version of me that concerns her most. Not when I raise my voice, but when I go perfectly, absolutely still. "Dad, Autumn can't find out like this. We can't blow this up without something solid. If you go at Knox on the word of what I saw, he'll deny it. He'll make it about me, about my judgment. You know how he is." "I know exactly how he is. So what are you going to do? Handle it." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I've got right now." Molly was quiet for a beat. Then, in a low voice, "Please don't do anything that lands you in a courtroom." "Molly, I'm serious, Dad. He's not worth it." "No," I agreed. "He isn't. Good night, sweetheart. I love you." I set the phone on the nightstand. Teresa was asleep beside me, her reading glasses still balanced on her nose, a paperback open and face down on her chest. I lay there in the dark and looked at the ceiling and started to think. I didn't know it yet, but Knox wasn't just cheating on my daughter. He was planning something far worse, and what I was about to find out would change the shape of everything. Here's something people tend to misread about me. Because I'm quiet, they think I'm slow. Because I don't react immediately, they assume I haven't noticed. It's a mistake that has cost more than one person more than they expected to pay. I am methodical, patient, the kind of man who, if his truck needs a specific part, will drive 45 minutes to the right supplier rather than use the wrong one because it's nearby. That's not stubbornness. That's the understanding that doing things correctly the first time is the only genuine shortcut that exists. I applied that same thinking to Knox Mercer. I didn't go to Autumn, didn't call Knox, didn't demand answers from anyone. I went to sleep, and in the morning I started building. My middle daughter, Vivian, was the first call I made. Vivian was 32, had studied communications in college, and had been married for 4 years to a man named Spencer, who worked in corporate security. Spencer dealt with surveillance systems, access control, and the kind of internal oversight that large companies use to protect assets and catch internal theft. Between his professional knowledge and Vivian's calm, analytical temperament, they were the most practically useful people I knew for what I had in mind. "Can you come by this weekend?" I asked Vivian. "I need some help with something around the house." "What kind of something?" "The kind I'd rather not discuss on the phone." A pause. "Is this about Knox?" I said nothing. "Spencer and I will be there," she said. No hesitation. Not a single question more. They arrived together. Vivian with a bag that looked like a camera bag because it was exactly that. Spencer with the focused, unhurried manner of a man who assesses situations for a living. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee while Teresa was out, and I laid out everything. Molly's call, the restaurant, the second phone, the way Knox moved through our house during football games. All of it. Vivian and Spencer listened without interrupting. When I finished, Spencer set down his mug and said, "How often does he come over?" "Every few weeks, sometimes more. And he always goes to the bathroom or wanders off. Every single time, now that I think about it." Spencer nodded slowly. "That's not a coincidence." He looked at Vivian. She looked back at him, and some kind of wordless agreement passed between them. Then he looked at me. "You have a safe in the office." My jaw tightened. "I do." "Where are the keys kept?" "Desk drawer. Under a false bottom insert." Spencer's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. If he's been in that office, there's a good chance he's found them. A hidden compartment that isn't purpose-built is usually found within 2 to 3 visits by someone who's specifically looking. The words landed in my chest like stones dropped in still water. I felt the ripple of them spread outward. "You think he's been in the safe," I said. "I think we need cameras to find out what he's doing in there," Spencer said. "And then you'll know exactly what you're dealing with." The cameras Spencer and Vivian installed were invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for them. One was built into a decorative clock on the bookshelf in my office, the kind with a weathered face that Teresa had picked up at an antique market years ago, now repurposed with a lens behind the painted numerals that had a perfect sightline to my desk. A second sat inside the hallway's smoke detector, angled to cover the office doorway and the stretch of hall leading to it. Both were wireless, motion-activated, connected to an encrypted app on my phone with cloud backup. Spencer walked me through every function. "The footage autosaves off-site," he said. "Even if someone found the cameras and destroyed them, the recordings are already stored." "Good," I said. Vivian was watching me from the kitchen doorway. "Dad, what are you going to do when you have proof?" "I'm going to know what I'm dealing with," I said. "Then I'll decide." "That's not the same thing as a plan. It's the beginning of one." She came over and hugged me, tucking her head against my shoulder the way she'd done since she was small. "Don't let this eat you," she said. "Promise me." "I'm fine, sweetheart." "You're acting distant," she said. "With you, that's not a good sign." I patted her back and didn't answer. She was right, and we both knew it. But there was more already in motion. The cameras were one layer. There was another layer I hadn't told even Vivian about yet, because I'd called someone else, 2 days after Molly's call, while I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a hardware store, running through what I knew and what I needed. I had a contact I'd known for 12 years through business dealings, a private investigator who mostly worked insurance fraud and domestic cases, and who was, in his own words, boring on purpose. He was discreet the way good mechanics are discreet. No drama, no theater, just results. I'd never needed him before. I'd always hoped I never would. I'd described Knox, described the behavior, described the restaurant incident. He'd asked 4 sharp questions. Then he'd said, "Give me time to do this right. 3, maybe 4 weeks. Take what you need." I said, "I want it airtight. You'll have it." By the time I was sitting in my recliner pretending to sleep, he'd been working for 3 weeks. Knox called about 10 days after the cameras went up. Casual, easy, the way he always was on the phone with me. We'd built what he probably thought was a comfortable relationship. Father-in-law and son-in-law, football games, the occasional shared opinion about car maintenance or the price of lumber. He was good at performing the familiar. I'll give him that. "Hey, Alexander, game's on this weekend. Autumn's got plans with her friends. Mind if I come watch at your place?" "Sure," I said, keeping my voice exactly as warm as it always was. "Come over. I'll get some food together." "Perfect. I'll bring beer." He arrived on time, shook my hand, complimented Teresa on the smell of whatever she had going in the kitchen, settled onto the sectional with the ease of a man in his own home. Teresa sat with us for the first half. At halftime, right on schedule, she stretched and said she was heading to bed, kissed me on the cheek, wished Knox a good night, disappeared down the hall. I heard our bedroom door close. I gave it 5 minutes of watching the halftime show. Then I did the performance I'd been rehearsing in my head all week, the long, slow yawn, the heavy blink, the recline back into the chair with a slight groan that said, 2 beers and a full stomach at my age. I pulled the throw blanket up over my lap and said, "I might close my eyes for a few minutes. You good?" Knox looked at me with that easy smile. "Yeah, of course. Rest up, old man." "Don't tell Teresa," I said, already sounding half asleep. He laughed quietly. I closed my eyes. For the first few minutes, nothing. Just the television, the broadcast team breaking down the first half statistics, the hum of the crowd noise. Knox shifted on the sofa. Ice clicked in his glass. Normal sounds. I kept my breathing slow and even, the rhythm of a man genuinely fading out. 15 minutes passed. Then I heard him get up. Quiet, measured footsteps moving across the living room toward the hallway, not toward the guest bathroom. Past it, I kept absolutely still. counted backwards from 60 in my head. When I reached 0, I slid my phone from my shirt pocket without moving anything else, and opened the app. The notification was already there. Motion detected. Office. I pressed play on the footage. The image was crisp, full color. Knox Mercer standing at my desk, the office door pushed most of the way closed behind him. He moved with a practiced efficiency that I found chilling. This was not a man exploring. This was a man who knew exactly where he was going and what he was looking for. He went straight to the top drawer, pulled it fully open. His fingers went to the right side of the drawer without hesitation. He found the false bottom insert on the first try. He'd been here before. That was as clear as the footage itself. He lifted the insert, looked at the keys beneath. Then he looked at the safe under the desk. His expression in that moment, I watched it on the small screen of my phone, was something between calculation and restraint. He was considering, running numbers, weighing timing. Then he put the insert back, put the keys back, closed the drawer. Not tonight. He was confirming, not acting. He'd come tonight just to verify the keys were still there, to make sure the landscape hadn't changed before he made his actual move. Smart. I closed the app, tucked my phone back in my shirt pocket, lay completely still. 2 minutes later, I heard the office door close. Footsteps returning down the hall. The creak of the sofa springs as Knox settled back in, the sound of his glass being lifted. Good nap, he said, not unkindly. I made a show of startling, slightly, blinking. Yeah, I said groggily, rubbing my eye. Missed anything good? They scored, he said. You're up by 10. See? Sleeps through the bad parts, wakes up for the good ones. There's a skill to that. He laughed, I laughed too. We watched the second half together like two men without a single thing wrong between them. He had no idea that I had just recorded him in my office, and that the footage was already saved to a remote server that he would never be able to reach. I didn't know it yet, but that footage was about to be the least devastating thing on my tablet. When I opened it at the dinner table, my investigator called me 4 days later. He didn't like to discuss things by phone if he could avoid it. Old habit, he said. Just good practice. So we met in person at a diner not far from my neighborhood, a booth in the back where nobody paid attention to two middle-aged men with coffee in manila folders. He slid the folder across the table to me. Take your time, he said. I took my time. The affair had been going on for nearly a year and a half, possibly longer, but 14 months was what he could document with certainty. Photographs, receipts, a weekend trip to Savannah, Georgia, hotel records. The woman, from what the investigator had gathered, appeared to genuinely believe she was in an exclusive relationship with an unmarried man. Knox had not told her he had a wife. He had constructed for her a version of his life that simply did not include autumn, in the same way you might redecorate a room to hide a water stain. Everything around it arranged just so the eye lands somewhere else. She doesn't know, I said. Doesn't appear to, he said. Which tells you something about the kind of lying we're dealing with here. This isn't a man who made a mistake and got in too deep. This is sustained, deliberate, compartmentalized. Two lives running parallel. That takes planning. I turned to the next section of the folder. The financial piece. My investigator had a background that went beyond domestic cases. He'd spent years doing corporate fraud work before going independent, and he'd known when he started pulling at Knox's threads that something didn't smell right. What he'd found was this. Autumn had a private investment account, established through a portion of the inheritance she'd received when Teresa's mother passed. It was in Autumn's name alone, managed independently, and she'd never discussed the full details with Knox, because it predated their marriage, and she'd always kept it separate. It was her security, her backup. Knox had found out about it. The investigator's working theory, supported by the timeline and by what I now knew about Knox's visits to my office, was that Knox had gotten into my safe at some point during an earlier visit, found copies of documents related to the account that I'd been safekeeping for Autumn, and used that information. He'd been feeding details, the investment's composition, its holdings, its timing vulnerabilities, to parties who had a financial interest in certain markets moving a particular direction. Those parties had made moves based on that inside knowledge. The account had lost value in ways that, on the surface, looked like ordinary market variance, but that the investigator's financial contacts said were too specific, too targeted, to be coincidental. I sat with that for a long moment. The coffee in front of me went cold. You're saying he used his access to my house and my safe to steal information from his own wife, I said. That's what the documentation suggests. to profit other people, and likely to receive something in return. We haven't traced that piece all the way yet, but the trail is there. I closed the folder, folded my hands on top of it. The diner hummed around us, clinking cups, a family in the next booth, someone's kid laughing at something. The ordinary world continuing at its ordinary pace. "How solid is this?" I asked. "Solid enough that I'd take it to an attorney today," he said. "Solid enough that the right financial professional would look at it and call it what it is." "What is it?" He looked at me steadily. "Fraud," he said, "among other things." I nodded, picked up the folder. "Keep your phone on," I said. He nodded back. "Take care of your daughter," he said. The call I made to my attorney that afternoon was the most important phone call of the entire process. She was a woman who specialized in financial fraud and family law, two disciplines that, in cases like this, one overlap more than most people realize. I had worked with her once before on a business matter and trusted her completely. I laid out everything: the investigator's report, the camera footage, the timeline, Molly's eyewitness account, and she listened with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who was already thinking 3 steps ahead. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Has your daughter been made aware of any of this yet?" she asked. "No. I want to do this correctly." "Good. Don't tell her anything until we've made copies of everything and established the documentation chain. Once we do that, I want to have materials ready to move to Autumn's own legal representation the same day you sit down with her." "I was thinking a family dinner," I said. Another pause. "You want to do this in front of him. I want there to be no room for private conversations before he knows what's coming," I said. "If she tells him first, he has time. I want him to find out at the same moment she does. I want him sitting in a room full of people who love her, looking at evidence he cannot explain, with nowhere to maneuver." My attorney was quiet for a moment longer. Then she said, "All right, give me a week to get everything organized. I want it clean, sequential, and irrefutable." "So do I said. "And Alexander, emotionally, your daughter is going to have a very hard night. I know. Make sure her sisters are there." "They will be," I said. "All of it will be." I called Teresa after I hung up. She listened to the full scope of what I'd found. Not just the affair, but the financial betrayal, the safe, the documents, the investment account. And when I was done, she was silent for a long time. Then she said in a tight voice, "He went after her money." "Yes." "He sat at our table and went after our daughter's money." "Yes." I heard her breathe out slowly. In 32 years of marriage, I had heard Teresa Bryant angry exactly 4 times. The sound in her voice right now was the 5th. Contained, clean, and absolute. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "That's the woman I married." "I need you to invite the family for dinner," I said. "Lemon chicken. The good plates." "Done," she said. And that was that. The dinner invitations went out one by one. Molly first. I told her enough to understand why she needed to be there, and she said she would bring Dalton. Vivian second. I told her to bring Spencer. I told both of them to act normal, to arrive hungry, to not contact Autumn between now and then. Autumn I called last. "Hey sweetheart, come for dinner, bring Knox. Mom's making the lemon chicken." "Oh, we love that. Knox has an afternoon thing, but I'll make sure he's done in time." "Tell him it's important," I said. A beat. She heard something in my voice. Autumn has always been perceptive beneath her optimism, the way deep water is often more complex than it looks. "Dad, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, baby," I said. "I just want my family around the table." She let it go. But I heard the small hesitation before she said, "Okay, we'll be there." I sat at the kitchen table afterward and looked at the tablet where I'd organized everything. The camera footage, time-stamped and clear. The investigator's photographs, clean and sequential. The financial documents, organized by my attorney with clinical accuracy, into a presentation that told the story from beginning to end in a way that required no interpretation. It was all there. 3 months of work. Every door closed. Every exit blocked. I thought about Knox in that office, standing at my desk with his calculated eyes running his arithmetic, thinking he was the smartest person in the equation. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The evening arrived warm and gold, the way Orlando evenings do when the day has been long and the light has gone soft. Teresa had set the table properly. The good plates, the cloth napkins, the good glasses. The kitchen smelled like lemon and rosemary and garlic, and I stood in the living room for a moment before everyone arrived and just breathed it in. This house. this life, and felt clearly and completely what was at stake. Molly and Dalton arrived first. Molly gave me a long look when she hugged me, searching my face, and I just nodded once. That was enough. Dalton shook my hand and went to help Teresa in the kitchen, which was typical of him, always finding the useful thing to do without being asked. Vivian and Spencer came next. Spencer was unhurried as always, with the watchful ease of a man who has assessed more rooms than he can count. He found a seat near the edge of the gathering and settled into it like furniture. Vivian squeezed my arm and said nothing. Autumn arrived with Knox on her arm. She looked beautiful, she always did, and happy in that uncomplicated way she had before you knew what she was walking into. Knox was smiling, handsome, unhurried. He shook my hand with that practiced grip and said the house smelled incredible. "Teresa's in the kitchen," I said. "Go on in." He went. I stood in the hallway for one moment and felt the full weight of what I was about to do, what it was going to cost my daughter, and what it was going to give her back. Then I went to the dining room and pulled my tablet from the chair where I'd positioned it, and I set it on the table face down, and I sat at the head and waited. Dinner was what dinner at our table always was. Overlapping voices, shared plates, the easy warmth of people who know each other's histories. Teresa's lemon chicken was, as always, extraordinary. Knox complimented it twice. He talked football with Dalton, made Vivian laugh about something, helped clear the first round of plates without being asked. He was performing perfectly. He had no idea. After the main course, during the lull between courses, I reached under my chair. "I need everyone to see something," I said. The table went still, not dramatically, just the ordinary transition of a group of people turning their attention in the same direction. I set the tablet on the table where everyone could see it. Knox was directly across from me, between Autumn and the far end of the table. There was nowhere for his eyes to go that wasn't toward that screen. "Dad, what is this?" Autumn said carefully. "Give it a minute, sweetheart," I said. "Just watch." The first thing on the screen was the camera footage from my office. The timestamp was clearly visible. The image was color, high definition, unmistakably Knox Mercer standing at my desk, lifting the false bottom insert, looking at the keys beneath. 27 seconds of footage. Crystal clear. The silence that followed had a particular texture to it. Not the silence of confusion, but the stillness of a room full of people who've just processed something and haven't yet decided what to do with it. Knox put down his fork. "That's my office," I said pleasantly. "The way you'd narrate a slideshow of vacation photos. My desk, my keys, in a spot nobody knew about except Teresa and me." I looked at Knox. "You want to explain what you were doing in there?" His face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Surprise, control, performance. He settled on performance. "Alexander, I was looking for a pin. I thought the drawer might—" "Skip that one," I said, and swiped to the next section. The investigators' photographs came up. Nearly a year and a half of deception, laid out clean and chronological. Knox and the other woman at dinner. Knox and the other woman in Savannah, walking a sunlit street hand in hand. Knox at a corner table in a low-lit restaurant, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. Autumn made a sound that I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was a small, compressed thing, the sound of air leaving something that had been holding its shape through sheer belief. Like a structure discovering the load has exceeded its design. Molly's hand crossed the table and covered Autumn's instantly. Knox's jaw went tight. "Those photos, that's not what it looks like, Autumn. You have to let me explain. I know how this appears, but—" "Knox," I said, and there was something in my voice that stopped him the way a closed gate stops traffic. "I'd recommend you stop. Alexander, this is between me and my wife. You don't get to. You stopped having the right to call her your wife the moment you put your hands on someone else," I said. Still flat, still even. A man describing facts, not feelings. But honestly, the affair is almost not the part that matters most. I swiped again. The financial documentation filled the screen. My attorney had organized it with clinical accuracy. Clear, sequential, the trail plain from beginning to end. The investment account, the documents from my safe, the timeline, the external parties, the market movements, an extended sequence of what looked like coincidence but was, in the aggregate, as deliberate as anything Knox had ever done. "Autumn's inheritance account," I said. "The one her grandmother left her. The one whose documents were in my safe, which you accessed." I watched his face. The account that lost value in ways my financial professional says were not coincidental. The word fraud didn't need to appear anywhere on that screen. It was already in the room. Autumn turned to look at Knox slowly, not with fury, not with grief, with the still measuring gaze of someone who is rapidly reorganizing everything they thought they understood. "You went into my father's safe," she said, "and you used what you found there." Knox opened his mouth. "For over a year," she said. He closed it. Vivian was watching him with the flat, steady look of someone who has been waiting for this confirmation for longer than she'd let on. Spencer was still. Dalton had his hand on Molly's back. Teresa had set down her napkin and folded her hands on the table with the quiet, settled dignity of a woman who has already made her peace and is now simply bearing witness. Knox looked around that table. He was smart enough, I'll grant him that, to understand in that moment that there was nothing here to work with, no soft targets, no room to negotiate or reframe or appeal. Every face in that room belonged to someone who loved Autumn more than they had ever been persuaded to extend benefit of the doubt to him. He started to say something about complexity, about things having gotten out of hand, about intentions and mistakes and the ways that pressure can make people. Autumn stood up. She did it without drama. No thrown glass, no raised voice. She simply stood, the way a person stands when a conversation is over, and she said, "Get out of my father's house. Autumn, please, please leave," she said. Right now. The please. That one word. The fact that even then, even in that moment, she had the composure to say it. That was my daughter. 29 years old, and already more grace under pressure than men twice her age. Knox picked up his jacket. He walked through the dining room, down the hallway, out the front door. The latch clicked. The room breathed. Autumn stood for a moment at her end of the table, hands resting on the back of her chair, looking at the wood grain. Then she sat back down. For a long moment nobody spoke. The clock in the hallway ticked. The refrigerator hummed. "How long have you known?" she asked me. "Long enough to do it right," I said. She nodded, absorbing that. "Did you know before the wedding? When he first came around?" It was the most honest question she could have asked me, and she deserved the most honest answer. "No," I said. I had a feeling he wasn't right, but I didn't know. I thought I might just be a stubborn father who didn't want to admit his daughter had grown up. I held her gaze. I was wrong to doubt my instinct. I should have dug sooner. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face shifted, not breaking, but releasing, letting something go. "No," she said. "You didn't have anything to dig into then, you had a feeling." She exhaled. "You did it right. If you'd come at him with just what Molly saw, he'd have found a way out of it. He was good at that." A pause. I would have believed him. "I know," I said. Molly moved around the table and wrapped her arms around her sister from behind, and Vivian came from the other side, and the three of them leaned together, and I watched my daughters hold each other and felt the specific ache of a grief you are glad to be present for. Because the alternative was that it happened without you. Teresa found my hand under the table. "You did right," she said quietly. I held her hand and didn't answer. What was there to say? The right thing had been done. It had needed doing. It was done. That was enough. Knox made the call I expected him to make. 2 days after the dinner, while I was in the garage doing nothing in particular and needed to be somewhere that wasn't inside the house, my phone buzzed. His name on the screen, I let it ring twice, then picked up. "Alexander." His voice was measured, controlled in the way that things are controlled when significant effort is being applied. "I think we should sit down and talk, man to man, before this goes any further." "We can talk," I said. "Right now is fine. Say what you want to say. Look, I made mistakes. I know that, serious ones. And I know you have documentation of things that could be interpreted a number of ways, particularly on the financial side. And I just think before anyone takes any steps that can't be undone. Interpreted," I repeated. The investment situation was complex. There were legitimate market factors that contributed to Knox, I said. "Stop." He stopped. "Those documents went to my attorney before the family dinner," I said. "Autumn's attorney received copies the same morning. The parties your investigator identified have already been approached. 2 of them cooperated within 48 hours. I paused. "This is not an opening position. I am not building leverage. I am not looking for a settlement that keeps your reputation intact and your life manageable. That ship has sailed so far past the horizon that we can't even see the wake. Alexander, I'm not finished." I kept my voice level, steady. The way you keep a tool level when you're using it for something that requires surgical focus. You came into this family as a son. I extended you trust that I extend to almost nobody. You sat at our table, you used our home, you looked my daughter in the eye every single day for 3 years, and the entire time you were treating everything she had, everything we had, as inventory, as assets to be accessed. I let that settle for a breath. There is nothing to negotiate. There is no conversation to have. Call your attorney, cooperate with the process, and get out of my daughter's life cleanly and completely. I hung up. He called back. I did not answer. He called again. I let it go. After the second attempt, there was nothing further. Not from him directly, anyway. His attorney contacted mine within the week. The usual opening gestures of a man trying to minimize his losses. Alternative explanations for the financial evidence, character references, an offer of partial restitution framed as goodwill rather than admission. My attorney brought every proposal to Autumn and let her decide. Autumn, from the comfort of the apartment she'd moved into temporarily, she wasn't going back to the place they'd shared, reviewed each one and sent back the same instruction every time. Proceed formally. That was my daughter. She had not received the information silently. Her statement, provided voluntarily, without pressure, to the process that was already underway, became another brick in the wall of documentation that left Knox no room to stand. He had no allies left, no cooperative parties, no friends of the arrangement willing to absorb exposure to protect him. The architecture that had held his double life in place depended entirely on the silence and ignorance of the people he'd been deceiving, and the moment that protective wall collapsed, the whole structure failed. He folded inside 60 days. The divorce was uncontested. Autumn's attorney secured terms that reflected the documented financial harm, and accounting Knox could not dispute given the paper trail, along with a clean severance from every shared asset and obligation. He vacated the apartment. He signed everything that required signing. He was gone from Autumn's life with a thoroughness that felt, in the end, like the only decent thing he'd managed to do. He never looked me in the eye again. I noticed that. I noticed it with the same sharp attention I'd applied to everything else, and I filed it away as the only honest communication he'd offered me in 3 years. There was a night about a month after the dinner, one of those Orlando nights that carries the day's warmth well past sundown, the frogs going in the drainage easement behind the yard, the oak trees moving slightly in a breath of air that passed through without committing to being a breeze. Teresa and Molly and Vivian were inside together, talking with the slightly elevated volume of people who are working their way through something difficult by proving that they can still laugh. Autumn and I sat on the back porch. Sweet tea, the dark, the frogs. For a long time, neither of us said a word. Then she said, "Were you scared I wouldn't believe you?" I considered that honestly. "A little," I said. "Not about the evidence, but that you might feel like I'd built a case to serve my own opinion of him rather than to protect you." She nodded, looking out at the yard. I wondered for about 10 seconds whether setting up cameras in your own house was too much, an overstep. "Did you land somewhere on that?" "He was in your office going through your safe," she said. "He was stealing from you to steal from me. I think you had every right in the world." "I think so too," I said, "but I needed you to believe it, not just me." She was quiet. A car passed on the street out front, its headlights briefly brightening the top of the fence. "I keep thinking about how certain I was," she said. "I kept waiting for the part where it didn't make sense, where there'd be a reasonable explanation. I kept expecting my own certainty about him to correct what I was looking at." "That's not a flaw," I said. "That's just love." She looked at me. There was sadness in her face. Real sadness, the kind that has to be lived through rather than argued down. But there was also something else, something solid and settled, already beginning to form around what the grief was leaving behind. "What do I do now?" she said. "Sleep," I said. "Eat. Let your sisters be annoying for a while. And then, when you're ready, you figure out what's next." She almost smiled. "That's your advice?" "My advice is that there is no rush. The next part of your life has been waiting patiently. It'll keep waiting a little longer." She looked at the yard again. "Vivian wants to travel. She's been making noise about a trip." "Go," I said. "You live in Florida. You can afford to chase the sun somewhere." She laughed at that. Actually laughed. The wide one. The real one she'd had since she was 6 years old. It went out into the warm night air, and I held on to the sound of it like something precious. "I'm going to be more careful," she said. "Not afraid. Just more like you. Watch first." "Don't watch too long," I said. "You'll miss the game while you're waiting to be sure about the players." She reached over and squeezed my arm. We sat in the dark for a while longer, just the two of us, just the night sounds, just the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a father and daughter on the other side of something hard, still whole. Knox Mercer left Orlando within a few months. I heard through a peripheral source that he'd relocated to another city, somewhere with contacts he hoped were still willing to extend him a fresh surface. I didn't follow his movements. He was no longer a factor in my equation, and I've never had much interest in people who've stopped being relevant. The financial case moved through its channels. The consequences were real and lasting, the kind that precede a man into every room he tries to enter for years afterward and close certain doors before he reaches them. I won't overstate my satisfaction at that, but I won't understate it either. When my attorney called me with the final outcome, I felt the particular clean feeling of a thing correctly resolved. "He seemed surprised it went this far," she said. "They always are," I told her. "Autumn's account was recovered in part. You never recover everything, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But enough to matter, enough to build from." Molly and Vivian surrounded their sister the way they always had. A few months after everything was finalized, I watched all three of them at dinner one evening, talking over each other, laughing at something Vivian's husband had said, passing food around without asking whose plate it was, and I felt something that had been held tight inside my chest for a long time finally let go. Teresa caught my eye from across the table. She smiled, that particular smile she has. The one that doesn't need any words behind it, because we've been together long enough that some things have graduated past language entirely. I reached under the table and found her hand. People ask me sometimes, in the abstract way people do when they're really asking about something specific in their own life. "What do you do when someone wrongs your family?" I tell them the same thing every time. Because it's the same thing every time. You don't rage. Rage feels righteous for about 3 minutes and then it just burns the parts of the house you needed to live in. You don't rushing is how you hand the other person ammunition. You don't threaten. A threat is a promise you've just given the other person time to prepare for. You watch. You document. You build, patiently and without announcing yourself, until everything is in place and nothing is missing, and every door is accounted for. And then, only then, you invite them to the table, and you let reality do the work. Reality is a better executioner than anger. It doesn't miss. It doesn't overcorrect. It just shows people exactly what they've done, in plain light, in front of everyone who matters. Knox Mercer spent 3 years in my house treating my family like a set of resources to be quietly exploited. He was charming about it. He was skilled. He was patient in his own way. He thought he understood the territory. He thought the father-in-law was a heavy sleeper who wouldn't notice. He thought the daughters were too busy with their own lives to pay close attention. He thought the wife was sweet and trusting and safely in the dark. He thought he was the only one running a long game. He was wrong. Spectacularly, completely, irreversibly wrong. My name is Alexander Bryant. I live in Orlando, Florida. I have a wife named Teresa who has been my partner in every sense of that word for 32 years and who still laughs at my terrible jokes. I have 3 daughters, Molly and Vivian and Autumn, who are sharper and stronger and more resilient than anyone who didn't raise them would ever think to guess. I am a patient man, a quiet man, a man who loves his family with a ferocity that runs so deep it doesn't need to announce itself, and who is capable, when the moment requires it, of the kind of careful, methodical, clinical precision that leaves absolutely nothing to chance. Knox Mercer made the mistake of thinking that patience looked like passivity. He opened my drawer. He found my keys. He stood in my office and did his arithmetic, feeling clever and safe and invisible. The whole family was watching. And what he saw, what was on that screen, what was in those photographs, what was written in those documents, what was on the faces of every person sitting at that table in the warm light of a Florida evening, I can promise you one thing with absolute certainty. He will never, as long as he lives, forget. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.